The frost hadn't melted yet. The sun was barely pushing light over the east hill, and the old cedar trees along the drive were draped in white, like they were mourning something. I had just gotten off my shift boots, still caked with soot shoulders, aching from welding 12 straight hours, when I pulled up the gravel and saw them my things. Not boxed, not bagged, just dropped in a heap on the porch like roadkill. My denim jacket, the one she stitched the cuffs on, soaked through. The boots I wore when we laid the first fence post mismatched, cracked like me. The front door had a sheet of paper taped to the glass, plain white, Sharpie marker. Her handwriting unmistakable. Don't come back. You wanted the ranch, you can rot in it. No greeting, no goodbye, no signature. I didn't even try the knob at first. Just stared at the note like maybe if I stared hard enough, the letters would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't. The locks were changed. I turned the handle out of instinct. It didn't budge, so I turned again harder this time, thinking maybe the wood had swollen in the cold. But it wasn't the door that changed. It was her. And now, everything I knew was locked behind it. I remember standing there, eyes fixed on the chipped paint of the porch railing, listening to the wind move through the hayfields. I had planted that ryegrass. I'd reseeded it myself after the drought in 2016, hauling sacks from the back of the truck, sowing in sweat and hope. That grass had finally come back green. But now even the wind felt different, like it wasn't mine anymore. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. My truck engine pinged as it cooled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there feeling my hands start to shake, my throat close up. She didn't even wait to speak to me. No explanation. Just this, an eviction by Sharpie. I kicked the duffel bag, heard the clink of metal my old socket wrench set. She'd left it loose, not even zipped up. My tools, my shirts. A box of family photos I'd kept in the drawer beside the bed, now wet and curling at the edges. The frame with her parents, I'd taken that picture the summer after her mom died. She left it too. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe she just didn't care. And there it was, the thought I hadn't let myself think for years. That maybe she didn't love me anymore. That maybe she hadn't in a long, long time. I looked down the road toward the mailbox we'd painted red together back in '04. The same road where we'd walked hand in hand after our first Christmas here, drunk on eggnog and stupid in love. I could still hear her laugh from that night, could still feel her glove slip from my hand as she reached up to touch the icicles hanging off the barn roof. God, she used to look at me like I was her whole world. I picked up the jacket, wrung out the sleeve. The cold bit deep through the wet denim. I slipped it on anyway, sat on the edge of the porch and stared at the door. Our door. The one I refinished the year after her mother died. The one she said made the house feel alive again. Now it was just wood. Just dead nailed wood and a lock I didn't have a key to. I pulled my phone out, called her. No answer. I didn't call again. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that maybe something happened, that maybe she was in the house crying right now, regretting it, that maybe this was just a fight taken too far. But deep down, I knew better. Because the door didn't lie, and neither did that handwriting. I got up, picked up the duffel, the wrench set the wet photos. I loaded them into the back of the truck, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel until the sun fully broke over the hills and lit up the porch in a way I used to call beautiful. But it wasn't beautiful anymore. It was hers now, and she wanted it that way. I didn't drive off right then. I stayed until the engine warmed and the silence got too loud, until the weight in my chest settled into something solid, something unmovable. I hadn't known it that morning, but that moment standing in front of our home unwelcome was the start of something else. Not a breakdown, not quite, but a peeling away, a slow unlearning, a funeral for a life I thought I'd built with someone who, as it turned out, had already left the marriage long before I noticed she was gone. And the cruelest part, she didn't just leave. She locked the door behind her. She didn't always look through me. There was a time her eyes followed me like I was gravity. We met in a broken year 1999 when the world was about to turn over and nothing felt certain. I was welding for an oil company outside Midland, saving every dime I could, sleeping in my truck some nights. She was in her last year of teaching at the local elementary school, still living with her parents on that crumbling ranch that smelled like mold and old hay. I never cared about the smell. I cared about the way she said my name, Marie. Her name was Marie. Back then, she said she never wanted to leave the land. Her father had lung disease, her mother was half blind, and her two brothers had long since moved to Austin. The ranch was dying by inches, she said, and someone had to love it enough to stay. I understood that. I came from people who stayed, not because it was easy, but because leaving meant giving up something sacred. I still remember the night we sat on the back of her daddy's rusted pickup looking out at the fence line. She said, "It's ugly, I know, but it's ours." I looked at her face and said, "Then it's beautiful." I asked her to marry me with a $200 ring I bought off a pawn shop clerk who was drunk before noon. She cried when I slipped it on her finger, said yes before I even finished the question. That night, we stayed up sketching floor plans for a new porch, calculating lumber costs we couldn't afford, and drinking beer until the stars looked like fireflies. She taught third grade, and I worked sunup to sundown. When we couldn't make the ranch payments in '04, I sold my Harley. That was the first time I saw her cry over money. She hated that I let it go. But I didn't. I told her, "It's just metal. That ranch is blood." She took care of her father until he died in 2009. By then, her mother couldn't remember names. We built ramps, bought a used wheelchair van, rearranged the house to make it easier on her. We never traveled, never had kids. Too much to care for already, she'd say, and I never pressed her. I told myself I was lucky just to have her, even when she forgot my birthday. Even when she said, "You work too much," as if I had any other choice. I turned down a foreman role in Dallas twice. Could have had benefits. Could have had a better life. But that would have meant selling the ranch, leaving her mother, uprooting what little life we had. And Marie couldn't imagine life anywhere but there. I convinced myself that was love. That sacrifice was what made it real. I told myself that over and over. Even when the bills outnumbered the smiles. Even when her words turned short and sharp like knives honed too long. Every summer, we'd repaint the barn doors. That was our thing. We'd argue about colors. She always wanted something too bright, and I always settled for deep red. But we laughed then. Or at least we used to. Last summer, she didn't even help. Said her back hurt. I painted the whole thing alone while she sat inside watching crime shows. When I came in to show her my paint-stained hands, she didn't look up. Just said, "Hope it doesn't peel this time." I told myself she was tired. that we'd been through too much, that long love meant quiet love, that maybe I wasn't showing her enough flowers or notes or whatever women said they wanted on those talk shows she watched. But she used to hate that stuff, said it was performative. She wanted presence, not pretense. So I gave her that. Presence. My whole life, every waking minute outside of work was tethered to that ranch and to her. I cooked on Sundays. I changed out the septic lines. I learned how to fix a busted water heater in the middle of a storm because no one else would come out that far. I learned the soil, the weight of snowfall on the roof, the best way to keep coyotes away from the chickens. I didn't just live there, I bled into it. I still remember the night we dug the post holes together, her in overalls, cheeks flushed from the sun. She looked at me then like she'd found her forever. Said, "I don't care if we never leave this place, as long as you're here." I held on to that for years, long after the words stopped coming, long after she stopped laughing at my dumb jokes or sitting on the porch swing with me after dinner. Long after she started locking the bathroom door and telling me she needed more space. And still, I believed in her. In us. Even when the silences between us stretched longer than the conversations. Even when she started working late and didn't offer explanations. Even when I'd wake up and she'd already be gone, the smell of her shampoo lingering like a ghost in our bed. I believed. Because I had to. Because I'd given her everything, and to admit she was already gone meant I'd given it to a shadow. I don't know when it shifted. Not exactly. There was no thunderclap, no slammed door, no screaming match to mark the end of us. Just erosion. Like water under stone. You don't see it until the shape is different. I remember the first time I noticed she didn't look at me the same. It was after dinner, one of those slow Wednesdays in March, when the wind makes the windows whistle. I made meatloaf the way her mama used to with the glaze on top, not inside. She didn't say thank you. Didn't even look up from her phone. I said something about the new calf in the barn, how it had taken to the bottle, well, how I was thinking we could start selling to that local guy in Llano. She just nodded, not really listening, scrolling. When I touched her hand across the table, she pulled back like I'd spilled something. It happened again and again. She stopped asking about my day. She stopped telling me about hers. I started finding half-finished wine glasses around the house, lipstick marks I didn't recognize, not because they weren't hers, but because I hadn't seen her wear lipstick in years. She used to put it on for me, even on regular days. "Gotta keep you interested," she used to joke. Now she didn't even say goodnight. We stopped sitting on the swing. She claimed the guest room sometime in the spring blamed my snoring. At first, I bought a mouthpiece. Then I started sleeping on the couch instead. She never once invited me back. And the phone calls, that was new. Whispered voices behind a closed door. I walked past the hallway once and heard her say, "He doesn't suspect anything." I froze. Couldn't breathe for a second. Waited for a laugh maybe, like it was some stupid joke with her cousin or a friend. But her voice didn't smile. It sounded sharp. Resentful. Like someone forced to sit through a life they never really chose. I didn't ask. That's the part that eats me now. I didn't ask. I told myself it wasn't my business that marriages went through rough spots and the best ones endured. That she was just stressed or lonely or still grieving her parents. But I think I knew. Deep down, some part of me had already started grieving something else. The ranch became her alibi. Going to feed the horses, she'd say, even though I'd already done it. Need to check the shed, even though she never fixed anything. She'd disappear for hours, come back smelling like perfume I didn't recognize. I asked her once gently if everything was okay. She looked at me like I was a stranger who'd touched her without permission. Said, "Why wouldn't it be?" in a voice as flat as the dirt road outside. I started talking to myself, filling the silence she left behind. I'd narrate what I was doing as I fixed the fence line, or poured coffee just to remember what my own voice sounded like. I don't know how long it had been since she called me Jake. Just Jake. Not you. Not him. Just me. One night, I found a hotel receipt in the laundry basket. Amarillo. 2 nights. I told myself it must have been for a training something with the school. But when I asked casual as I could, she said she hadn't traveled for work in months. I held that receipt in my pocket for 3 weeks. Carried it like a tumor. Showed it to no one. I didn't need to. The truth had already moved in. I started noticing other things. Credit card statements I didn't recognize. A new blouse I'd never seen before. Strange charges labeled consultation and title services. I asked her if we were refinancing. She laughed. Not kindly. Just this bitter little scoff, and said, "Why would I bother explaining it to you?" That night, I walked the perimeter of the property, just like I used to when we first moved in. The stars were out, and the moon hung low and yellow, bleeding over the hills. I touched every fence post, every gate latch, every tree knot. The land felt quieter. Not peaceful, empty, hollow. Like it was bracing for something it couldn't stop. And still I stayed, because I believed maybe she was hurting in a way I couldn't see. Maybe if I just held the line, loved her through it, she'd come back. The way people come back from storms, shaken but still themselves. I thought love could be a lighthouse, that if I kept the light on, she'd find her way. But there was no storm. She was just done. She'd been done for a while. And I think the cruelest part wasn't that she left. It was that she let me stay long enough to think she hadn't. The banker looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be the one to say it. His fingers tapped the desk for a second. Then he cleared his throat and leaned forward just slightly, like what he was about to tell me might detonate. I remember the overhead light was flickering, and it made his face look jittery nervous. He was a younger guy, mid-30s, maybe clean haircut, tie too tight. "Jake," he said, "I just need to confirm something before we move forward with your renewal. The title to the property, the ranch, it's not in your name anymore. I didn't get it at first. Thought maybe he meant one of the vehicles, or the side pasture." I laughed. A short, confused chuckle. "You mean the land trust? Or the trailer title? It's all still under the joint deed, right?" He paused. Then he turned his screen slightly toward me. I saw my name full legal with a strike-through, and below it, Marie L. Hargrove, sole owner. My ears went hot. I blinked, leaned in, scanned the date. It was filed 8 months ago, when I'd been in the hospital for a hernia repair. The week I signed over medical power of attorney to her just in case, because they'd warned me about complications. It had seemed simple, safe, necessary. "She used the power of attorney to remove your name," he said, his voice now quieter, less official. "It's legal, technically, but usually that's done in emergencies, medical transfers. Not like this." I couldn't move. My arms went heavy. I felt like I was underwater, hearing muffled voices, seeing colors blur. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The ranch, the home, My name. Gone. I nodded, not because I understood, but because I didn't want him to see me fall apart. I signed what I needed to sign, shook his hand, walked out into the hot air, blinking at the sun like I'd been reborn into someone else's life. I sat in the truck for almost an hour. Engine off, windows down. I watched the American flag above the bank flutter like it was mocking me. I tried to piece it together why she would do it, how long she'd been planning it. Every memory began to shift, like a picture tilting slowly on the wall, revealing the crack behind it. I drove home, if I could even call it that anymore. The drive was dust and silence. My hands didn't grip the wheel. They just rested there, heavy stunned. When I pulled up to the ranch, I stared at the land differently. The corral I'd rebuilt after the storm in 2011. The side shed I'd added with salvaged timber. The peach trees I planted in honor of her mother. I looked at them and felt nothing but distance, like they no longer belonged to me, or maybe never had. I found her in the kitchen, calm, reading the paper. Her coffee cup rested next to a vase of fresh lilies I hadn't seen before. I held the printout from the bank in my hand. "I know," I said. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even flinch. She folded the paper, set it aside, and finally met my eyes. "Jake, you were never supposed to see that." My chest tightened. I opened my mouth, but again, nothing came. Just air. Just hurt. "You used my medical paperwork," I said, slowly trying to feel the words, taste them, understand them. "You would have fought me," she said, voice flat, quiet. "And I didn't want to fight. I wanted it to be clean." "Clean." My voice cracked. "You erased me from our home." She didn't move. "You were always married to the land, Jake. Not to me. Don't act surprised now." I stepped back, like she'd slapped me. I looked around at the kitchen, the one we'd retiled together. The paint I'd chosen, the calendar still bearing my handwriting. And I realized she'd already moved on. Not with a man necessarily, not with another life, but from me, from the us I had believed in. "Are you selling it?" I asked, even though I already knew. She nodded. "I found a buyer. Young couple from Houston. They want horses. Kids." I almost laughed. Bitter hollow. The kind of life we never got to have. Her face didn't change. "You knew what this was. You always knew." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake her into remembering the decades I'd given her. But all I could do was stare at her. The shape of her, the coolness of her, the way she now held herself like I was a distant guest in her story, a footnote. "I gave you everything I said, barely more than a whisper." "I never asked you to," she replied. That was the moment, the turning point. Not the bank, not the title, not the forged signature or the sale agreement. It was those 6 words. "I never asked you to." And suddenly, everything broke open. Every night I spent fixing that damn barn. Every holiday I worked overtime. Every whispered prayer I said for her mama's soul. It didn't matter. Not to her. Not anymore. Maybe never. I didn't cry. I just nodded, turned around, walked out the door that used to be ours. The door I built with my bare hands from pine slabs, reclaimed after the old church burned down. The one she once said made her feel like home was permanent. Funny, isn't it? How permanent becomes optional in someone else's mouth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the barn with a kerosene lamp and a bottle of whatever was left in the cabinet under the sink. I don't drink much, never really did, but that night the quiet felt too loud and the dark too familiar. I sat on a bale of hay with my back against the wall and listened to the old place breathe, creaks in the rafters, the soft shuffling of the horses, the wind catching under the eaves. It used to feel alive. It used to feel like mine. The night air pressed in close heavy with the scent of manure hay and that old cedar post by the barn door. I could hear coyotes howling in the distance somewhere past the ridge, and in the house just beyond the shadows, she slept like I never existed. I could have gone back in. My name was still on the mailbox, even if it wasn't on the deed. I could have demanded something, my clothes, my dignity, my say. But I didn't, because it was already over. And the only person who hadn't accepted that until now was me. In the morning, I knocked on the door. Not to start a fight, just to end the silence. She opened it like she'd been expecting me. "Are you going to make this ugly?" she asked. "No," I said. "You already did." Her jaw tensed. "I've got a realtor meeting in 20 minutes. "I won't be here when they show up," I said. "You won't have to worry." She looked relieved, but she masked it fast, like she didn't want to give me the dignity of knowing she was grateful for my quiet exit. Her arms crossed. "So what now?" "You just leave." I nodded. "It's clear you already did." She didn't answer that. I handed her the spare truck key. The old Chevy was in her name anyway. I kept the toolbox in the back, though. Told her I'd leave with the Dodge, that I'd pack what was mine and be gone before sundown. She stood in the doorway watching me like she was waiting for me to explode, for me to scream, to rage. But I didn't give her that. I gave her silence. And I think that unnerved her more. "Jake," she said just as I turned to go. I looked back. She looked at me, then really looked. The first time in months, maybe years. I didn't plan for it to be like this. I nodded once. "Doesn't matter how you planned it. This is how it is." I spent the next 5 hours moving quietly, deliberately. I didn't take much. A few shirts, my boots, my socket set a box of tools I bought with my first paycheck as a teenager. I took my grandfather's pocket knife, the folded American flag from my father's funeral, and a shoebox full of letters Marie wrote me in the early years. I didn't read them, not then. Just placed them gently in the cab beside me, like they still held the truth. I left the rest. The furniture, the dishes, the photos on the wall. All of it belonged to a version of us that didn't survive. Just before leaving, I stood in the pasture. The light was going gold, that kind of quiet sunset that softens everything it touches. I took one last walk to the fence line where we used to lay in the grass and watch for satellites. The same place where I first told her I loved her. It wasn't bitterness that came over me then. It was sorrow. Not just for what I lost, but for who I was when I believed she'd never do this. Back at the truck, I wrote a short note. Not to beg, not to guilt, just to close the circle. Marie. There are things I'll never understand. Maybe I'm not meant to, but I hope one day, when all this is far enough behind you, you'll remember the parts of me that were kind, that stayed, that tried. You may not believe it, but I never stopped loving you. Not until you told me I never should have. Jake. I folded it and slid it under the front door. Then I left. No goodbyes, no scenes. Just dust in the rear view and the weight of everything I didn't say pressing against the back of my throat. I parked the truck outside a run-down trailer lot south of Burnett, across from a shuttered gas station and a feed store that looked like it hadn't sold feed in years. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked to the office. A skinny man with a bad comb-over and a gold chain nodded without looking up from his paperwork and slid me the lease. $300 a month, no questions asked, month to month. I signed it with a borrowed pen, handed him a cash deposit, and he pointed toward the far end of the property. Lot 17. It leaned to one side like it was tired of standing. The screen door was half off its hinge. The inside smelled like mildew and microwave dinners, and the floor near the sink was soft enough to make you second-guess every step. But it was mine, and no one could lock me out of it. I didn't hang anything up, didn't bring in pictures or rugs or tokens of the life I used to have. I slept on a thin mattress and let the silence stretch. Some nights it felt too heavy. I'd stare at the ceiling fan and wonder if I'd made a mistake not fighting her. But most nights, I just lay still and let the quiet do what it needed to. There was a strange comfort in having no one to answer to, no one to explain myself to, the kind of emptiness that feels almost like peace if you don't look at it too hard. During the day, I found odd jobs. Word got around quick. Jake Hargrove was out of the ranch and looking for work. Some of the local boys who remembered me from the welding yard started dropping by. I fixed a few old tractors, rewired a fence charger, changed a transmission for a widow down the road who paid me in cash and homemade biscuits. I didn't advertise, didn't want to, but I never said no to anyone who asked. It felt good to work with my hands again. Not for a mortgage, not for a shared future, just for the doing of it, for the steadiness of grease under fingernails and the hum of a job done right. I stopped checking the real estate listings, stopped driving past the ranch. That part of me had to die, or I wouldn't survive the rest of it. 3 months in, I got a call. The new owner, a young man named Derek, polite, soft-spoken. Said Marie had given him my number in case anything came up with the horses. Said one of the mares wasn't eating and he didn't know what to do. I almost hung up. Almost told him it wasn't my place anymore, but I didn't. I drove out there that afternoon. The gate looked freshly painted. The mailbox had been replaced, the red one gone. I felt my throat close when I turned up the drive, but I kept going. I told myself it was just a property now, a job, nothing more. Derek met me in the front pasture. He couldn't have been more than 30. He looked nervous, like he expected me to be angry. She said you knew the place better than anyone, he said, shifting from foot to foot. Didn't want to bother you, but... It's all right, I said. Let's take a look. The mare was dehydrated. Minor colic, nothing serious. I walked her slow, rubbed her neck the way I used to. Talked to her in the same low voice I used with all the animals, like they were old friends who never judged, only listened. After a while, her breathing evened out. Derek watched me carefully. You used to live here, didn't you? He asked, hesitant. I didn't answer for a moment. Just looked out at the hills, the way the sunlight slanted across the barn, the wind pushing through the ryegrass. Yeah, I said finally. A long time ago. He nodded. Didn't press. He thanked me, offered to pay. I refused. Told him to call if anything else came up. As I turned to leave, he said something that stopped me cold. She said you built most of this with your own hands. I turned back. She say why she sold it? He shrugged. Said it was full of ghosts. I almost laughed. Almost told him ghosts aren't born in houses, they're made in people. But I didn't. Just nodded and walked back to the truck. Driving away felt different this time. I didn't ache. I didn't bleed. I just felt done, like I'd finally put down something I'd been carrying far too long. Back at the trailer, I sat on the steps and watched the sky go pink and then dark. The crickets started chirping. Somewhere far off, a train horn moaned through the dusk. I took a breath. Not a deep one. Not a clean one. But mine. The first night I truly slept, it rained. Not a thunderstorm, just a slow, steady whisper against the metal roof of the trailer. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd heard rain, without panic, no leaks to seal, no feed to cover, no wife calling from the back door, asking where I put the flashlight. Just me listening, letting it happen. The world I realized didn't stop turning just because I'd been broken. I started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because the mornings felt clean. I'd boil coffee in a dented tin pot, sit on the trailer steps, and watch the sky shift from charcoal to pale blue. For the first time in years, I felt like a man living inside his own skin instead of trying to disappear from it. One morning, about 6 weeks after visiting the ranch, I found an envelope tucked into the side of my mailbox. No return address, no postage, just my name in her handwriting. Jake. I didn't open it right away. I took it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it for the better part of an hour. Her handwriting looked rushed, tilted slightly right the way it always did when she was holding something back. I used to know everything about her, the way she dotted her I's, like little circles, the way her J in my name always curved too far under, like it wanted to hold on. When I finally opened it, the paper shook in my hands, but my face didn't. I was past that part of grief, the part that floods. Jake, this letter won't fix anything. I know that, but I've replayed your face in my head too many times not to try. I didn't leave because of one thing. I left because I'd already been gone inside myself for years. You didn't fail me. You loved me in the only way you knew how. With grit, with your hands, with silence. And maybe that was the problem. We stopped knowing how to talk to each other. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I didn't hate you. Not then, not now. I don't expect an answer. I just hope you sleep well. Marie. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it inside the shoebox with the old letters from the beginning. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't lift anything either. It was just paper, just ink, a monument to something already buried. That same week, I got a knock on my door. It was Emma Rodriguez. Her dad and I had worked together in the 90s. She ran a feed store now, said she'd heard I was fixing things again. I got an old quarter horse with a bad hock, she said, and a tractor that won't quit coughing. I nodded. Which one you want me to look at first? We talked a while. She didn't ask about Marie, and I didn't offer anything. But after she left, I realized I'd laughed. Once. A real one. It caught me off guard like a breeze through a closed window. But it stayed. More work came. More faces. Old ones. New ones. People remembered who I was before all of it. Before the ranch swallowed me whole. They remembered the man who showed up, fixed what was broken, and didn't ask for praise. I started remembering him too. Some nights, I sat outside with a beer and listened to the low murmur of the trailer park settling down. Radios humming, kids laughing far off the quiet creak of someone's porch swing. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have at 58, but it was mine. Mine in a way the ranch hadn't been for years, even while I lived there. I didn't call Marie, didn't write back, because there was nothing left to say. That letter wasn't for me, not really. It was for her, a release maybe, or a confession that came too late to matter. Letting go isn't one big gesture. It's a series of small, quiet decisions. Not checking her social media, not asking the feed store girl if she'd heard anything, not turning up the road that led back to the house I once called home. Instead, I planted a tomato vine next to the trailer. I changed the oil in the truck. I started shaving again. The men at the diner started calling me by name again, not, "Hey man," or "You that guy from the ranch." Just Jake. Just me. I wasn't healed. I wasn't happy all the time. But I was living. And that, I realized, was more than I had been doing in years. It was early fall when the ranch sold for good. I didn't hear it from Marie. I heard it from an old-timer at the co-op, Roy Sanderson, who'd been buying feed for longer than most folks had been alive. "Big deal closed last week," he said, sliding his receipt into a denim pocket. "That old Hargrove place, some LLC out of Austin. Gonna turn it into a retreat center or something." I nodded like it didn't knock the breath out of me. "Shame," Roy said, sipping his coffee. "That place had bones, real bones." I didn't say much, just tipped my hat and walked back to the truck. But in my chest, something shifted again. Not grief this time, not anger. Just an ending settling into place, like dust on a closed book. That night, I drove out past the property line. Not to see it, not really, just to be near it. I parked a half-mile down the road and walked up the ridge on foot. There was a gate now, new steel expensive. Clean white paint on the fencing, too. Everything shiny, like they were trying to erase what it had been. The barn roof had been replaced. The porch had new rails. From that far off, it didn't look like the same place at all. But I knew what was underneath. Every cracked beam, every patched pipe, every blistered floorboard I'd nailed down with calloused hands, I remembered it all. I stood there until the sky burned orange behind the hills, then walked back to the truck without saying goodbye. It wasn't mine to mourn anymore. A week later, I got a package. No note, just a cardboard box carefully taped, my name scribbled in a familiar slant. Inside were things I had forgotten even existed. My father's old harmonica, the wood carving of a horse I made Marie in '02, a photo of us on the front porch back when she still wore her hair long and wild, and folded underneath all of it a small quilt stitched from old denim and flannel shirts. I recognized some of the fabric, the blue plaid from my favorite winter work shirt, a strip from her floral apron, a faded red square I couldn't place until I held it to my chest, and remembered the old feed sack I used to tie up the broken fence gate our second summer on the ranch. She'd kept it all. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of it rest in my lap. I didn't cry, not in the way people expect. My face stayed dry, but my body sank under it, a quiet, aching kind of release. It didn't change anything. Not the betrayal, not the silence, not the months she planned her exit while I built fence lines and cooked dinner and believed we were okay. But it did something else. It told me she hadn't erased me completely, and strangely, that mattered. That next Sunday, I took the box out to the trailer steps. I didn't light a fire or toss anything to the wind. I just opened it all again, piece by piece, and let it exist without needing it to mean anything. I held the photo up to the light. We were so young, so certain. Her arm around my waist, my hand on the railing we built together. A porch swing behind us rocking in the breeze. We weren't pretending in that photo. We really were happy, at least for a moment. And that's the thing I came to understand. Just because something ends doesn't mean it wasn't real. It just means it changed. A few days later, Emma came by again. The tractor was fixed, but now the water heater was giving her trouble. We stood in her yard while she told me about her brother moving back from San Antonio, her niece applying to colleges. Her voice was easy, her laugh genuine. I caught myself watching the curve of her mouth when she smiled. That surprised me. I wasn't looking for anything. I'm still not. But something inside me had softened a door I didn't realize I'd closed, cracking open just slightly. Enough to let in a little light. Enough to remember that being alone isn't the same as being forgotten. That weekend, I took the trailer steps apart and built new ones. Stronger. Wider. I planted a second tomato vine, and this time, I smiled when I saw the first green bud. Life was still happening. Not loudly, not urgently, but steadily, like the earth refusing to give up its rhythm just because one man's world fell apart. The next time I drove past the ranch, I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. It wasn't mine anymore. And for the first time, that felt okay. Autumn melted into winter quietly. No big frost, no sharp wind cutting through the hills like in years past. Just a slow cooling, like the land itself was catching its breath. I started wearing my old flannel again, the elbows nearly gone, the sleeves smelling faintly of motor oil and cedar. The mornings got darker. The coffee felt warmer. And the ache in my chest, well, it stopped announcing itself. I'd fallen into a rhythm. Work when it came, rest when it didn't. On Fridays, I'd treat myself to a diner breakfast eggs over easy wheat toast, black coffee. On Sundays, I started taking long drives on back roads with no destination, just letting the truck eat up the silence. The roads felt familiar, but not haunting. I didn't feel chased anymore. The trailer started to feel like a place I could stay instead of a place I was hiding in. I fixed the leak under the sink, repainted the cabinets, replaced the soft boards near the door with pressure-treated planks I salvaged from a job. Piece by piece, I rebuilt what I could. It wasn't a ranch. It wasn't home in the way the old place was, but it was honest, and it held me up when I needed it to. One night, I found myself humming. Nothing in particular, just a low tune I'd made up as I worked. I was replacing a light switch when I caught myself tapping along with the beat on the wall. That surprised me more than anything else in those months. I wasn't just surviving. I was remembering how to be human again. I had stopped checking for signs of her. No more tracing her online. No more watching for her car in town. She had vanished from my daily thoughts like fog lifting off a field. Not suddenly, but slowly, almost mercifully, until one day she wasn't gone. I walked into the feed store for a bag of cracked corn, And there she was, standing near the register. Hair shorter now, lighter, wearing a navy coat I didn't recognize. She looked up as the bell over the door jingled, and our eyes met. Her face didn't flicker. No smile, no anger. Just a stillness like she was bracing herself for something she couldn't name. "Jake," she said. Just my name. No question, no warmth. I nodded once. Marie. We stood there like that for a moment, two people who had built a whole life and burned it down without raising their voices. "How have you been?" she asked, almost out of obligation. "I'm all right," I said. She looked past me, then like something behind me was more important. "I didn't think I'd see you here." "I still live here," I said. "I never left." Her jaw tensed slightly. Not in anger, more like guilt maybe, or regret. I didn't want it either way. "You look well," she said. I didn't return the compliment, not because she didn't, but because it felt like something we didn't owe each other anymore. There was a pause. She adjusted the strap on her purse. "The new owners said you helped with one of the horses." "That was kind of you." "Wasn't for them?" I said. She gave a small nod. Maybe that landed somewhere inside her. Maybe not. Then, just like that, she turned, paid for whatever she had in her hand, twine, I think, and walked out without another word. I stood in that aisle for a long time, staring at nothing. Not because I missed her, but because I didn't. That night, I sat on the porch steps again, the denim quilt she sent me folded across my legs. I looked up at the stars, just like we used to do, and realized I didn't feel haunted anymore. The memories had stopped drawing blood. The porch swing, the hand-troweled walkway, the way she used to laugh from her throat. They had all become facts. Nothing more. It occurred to me that you don't get to choose what people remember about you, but you do get to choose what you remember about them. And I chose not to remember the door slamming, the note, the banker's expression, the cold kitchen. I chose to remember her once brushing sawdust from my shoulders with her bare hands saying, "You always look better, covered in something real." I chose that memory because that man, the one she saw then, that's the man I've been trying to be again. Not for her, for myself. The first time I laughed without flinching, it caught me off guard. It was during a job fixing a busted gate latch out at the Carson place. Their grandson Wyatt, maybe 10 years old, missing a front tooth, had been following me around all afternoon, peppering me with questions about tools and rust and whether horses could get sunburns. At one point, he picked up a dead grasshopper and held it out like a gift, eyes wide grinning. "Think he's just sleeping?" he asked. I snorted loud. Didn't mean to. It slipped out of me before I could hide it. A real full laugh that came up from somewhere I hadn't touched in months. He laughed too, and for a second we just stood there in the sun, me with a wrench in my hand, and this boy waving around a dead bug like a treasure. And I felt light. That night, I called my sister for the first time in almost a year. We hadn't spoken much. She lives out in Arkansas, and things with Marie had made me drift from everyone. But she picked up on the second ring. "Jake," she said. Her voice cracked like she didn't believe it. "Hey," I said, "just thought I'd check in." We talked for almost an hour. About nothing. About everything. About how Ma's old dog finally passed, and how her youngest got into welding school. She didn't ask about Marie. I think she knew better. But before we hung up, she said something I'll never forget. "You sound more like yourself than I've heard in years." I hung up and stared at the ceiling, blinking at that old water stain above the fan. Myself. I wasn't sure who that even was anymore, but I felt closer to him than I had in a long time. The trailer was still small. The night still got cold, but I'd filled the cabinets with food I actually wanted to eat. I replaced the mattress with one I didn't have to flip every week. I bought a second-hand radio and listened to old country songs while I worked. I even started keeping a journal, just short notes about the day. How the air smelled like mesquite. How the horses at Emma's place started lining up when they heard my truck. How my hands even now knew what to do without needing instruction. Then one night, I dreamed of her again, but not the Marie I left behind. This time, we were young. We were standing in the field behind the barn, dusk, softening everything, and she was smiling, truly smiling. She reached for my hand and said, "We did all right, didn't we?" I looked around, saw the sky turning lavender, the outline of our first fence, the broken post we never got around to fixing. "We did our best," I said, and she nodded like that was enough. I woke up with a quiet kind of ache, but not sadness, not bitterness, just a softness, a release. I got up, made coffee, and sat outside wrapped in the quilt she sent, and I realized something some people don't leave to hurt you. They leave because they don't know how to stay. Because staying means facing things they buried long ago, and some hearts just don't know how to carry weight the way others do. That morning, I finally went through the last of the boxes I'd never unpacked, the one marked Tools plus MSC. Inside, at the very bottom, wrapped in an old towel, was my wedding ring. I held it in my palm, felt the weight of it. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't even sad. It was just a symbol from a chapter I'd finished. I walked outside, knelt by the tomato vine, and pressed the ring deep into the soil. Covered it with dirt gently. Let it stay there, next to the roots of something still growing. I didn't say anything, didn't make it a moment, just stood, brushed off my hands, and walked back inside. I didn't need closure anymore, because I wasn't circling the wound. I was finally walking past it. It was the week before Christmas when I found myself standing in front of the church I hadn't stepped foot in for over 15 years. The parking lot was full of pickups and dusty sedans, wreaths on every window, kids running wild in their Sunday best. I wasn't there for service. I was there because Mrs. Callahan, who used to bring Marie pies every Thanksgiving, had called me in a panic about a busted heater in the fellowship hall. Said the kids needed it fixed before the pageant that night. I thought about ignoring the message. Then I thought about those kids, bundled in angel wings and crooked halos, trying to sing with frozen fingers. So I went. The room hadn't changed. Same peeling linoleum, same water stains on the ceiling tiles. I got to work without fuss, crouched behind the old furnace with my socket wrench and a flashlight that barely held a charge. I heard them practicing in the next room, their voices rising and falling in sweet, chaotic harmony. One girl kept forgetting her lines. A boy in the back sneezed 3 times in a row and got a laugh each time. I smiled, kept working. The heater kicked on after 20 minutes. The warm air came slow, then steady, and I stood there for a moment, letting it wash over me. Not just the heat, the sound, the life, the feeling of being useful. Needed in a way that didn't take anything from me. Mrs. Callahan hugged me tight when I told her it was done. Smelled like peppermint and dust. "You saved Christmas," she said. I laughed, shook my head. No, ma'am, I said. I just fixed a heater. But on the drive home, something else stirred. I passed the town square, saw the lights strung over Main Street, the way the snow flurries caught the lamplight. I hadn't put up decorations in years. I used to before Marie stopped asking. We used to cut our own tree from the back pasture and argue about ornaments. Then one year, she just left the box in the attic. The year after, I didn't even bother. Back at the trailer, I opened the closet and pulled down a small box I'd packed without thinking holiday odds and ends I couldn't throw away. Inside were 2 wooden reindeer, a cracked snow globe, and a string of lights so tangled they looked like a bird's nest. I sat on the floor untangling them for over an hour. I strung them across the window and plugged them in. Half of them didn't work, but the ones that did gave off the softest, most stubborn kind of glow. A few days later, Emma stopped by with a plate of tamales and a thermos of cider. She stood on my porch in her flannel coat and looked through the window at the lights. "You decorate?" she asked, clearly surprised. I shrugged. "Just a few old things. They look good," she said. We sat on the steps and shared the cider. Talked about the cold coming in, about how the feed prices were bound to jump again, about her niece wanting to apply to college out of state. Then there was a lull, a comfortable one. "You ever think about getting another place?" she asked suddenly. "A little land, somewhere of your own again." I looked out over the trailer park at the rows of tired roofs and patched fences. Then I looked at her. Her eyes were warm, unpitying. "Maybe someday," I said, "but not yet." She nodded. "You don't have to rush." That night, I sat on the porch alone after she left, pulled the quilt tighter around me, watched my breath hang in the air, and thought about how different life looked from this vantage point. Not what I thought I wanted, not what I worked so hard to build, but quieter, truer somehow. And then, without thinking, I whispered into the dark, "Thank you." I didn't know if it was to her, or to the silence, or to myself. Maybe all three. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and sat at the table with a pen. Not to write Marie, not to write a memoir or some grand declaration. Just a note. A short one. Jake Hargrove, December 23rd. Didn't fall apart. Didn't disappear. Still here. Still building. I folded it, slipped it into the back of the journal, and started my day. The spring came in slow that year, like it was learning how to trust again. The mornings stayed cold longer than usual, but the light softened in a way I hadn't noticed before. Everything seemed quieter, not hushed, not dead, just measured. Like the world was giving me time to catch up. By April, the tomato vines had taken over the side wall of the trailer. I'd built them a proper trellis out of old cedar I salvaged from a tear-down up the road. The stalks stretched tall leaves, strong and wide. It felt good to check them every morning. Something small, steady, and alive. I found myself walking more, not for any reason, just long loops around the gravel roads and backwoods past the creek that only filled after hard rain. The land out there still smelled the same wet cedar sagebrush mud baking in the sun. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and let it all in. That used to be the kind of thing Marie did, breathe deep and say things like, "Smells like the beginning of something." Back then, I never understood what she meant. Now I think I do. I was fixing a starter on a '92 Ford one afternoon when I got another call from Derek, the new guy who bought the ranch. Said the west fence had collapsed in a windstorm, and the horses were spooked. He didn't ask for help directly, but his voice carried something close to pleading. I almost said no, not because I was bitter, just because I wasn't sure I belonged out there anymore. But an hour later, I was tightening the last wire on the far post dust, and my throat sweat gathering at my collar. Derek stood nearby holding the post steady while I secured the brace. He was a good kid green, but willing to learn. Didn't know fence work could feel like church, he said, wiping his brow. I smiled a little. If church leaves you sore and sunburnt, then yeah. We stood looking out over the field for a while. The hills rolled soft in the distance, and for the first time since all of it, I didn't see ghosts in that place. I saw land, just land. Before I left, Derek reached into his pocket and handed me something. Marie dropped this off a few weeks ago, he said. Said if I ever saw you again, I should give it to you. It was a small wooden frame, the kind you might find at a thrift store. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in years. Me and her on the porch the very first winter after we moved in. I was in coveralls holding a mug. She was laughing at something I'd said, her hand on my shoulder. We looked younger, lighter, like we hadn't yet learned how hard it would all become. I took it in my hands, stared for a long time. I don't need it back, I said finally. All right, he said, but you don't have to hate where you've been to be at peace with where you are. That stuck with me. Back at the trailer, I didn't toss the photo. I didn't burn it or bury it or pin it on a wall. I just placed it on a shelf inside the cabinet and closed the door. Not as a shrine, not as a scar, just a part of the whole. The next day I went into town and bought a proper notebook, thick paper-stitched spine, the kind you keep for years. On the first page, I wrote only this day one. Nothing missing, nothing owed. And then I filled the next page with what I saw out my window, the sway of the trees, the shimmer of heat on the gravel, a bird landing on the porch rail, like it belonged to both of us. Emma stopped by that evening with a jar of honey from her cousin's hive. We sat on the steps again, and when she asked how I was, I didn't lie or dodge or make it about the weather. I'm good, I said. Not perfect, but good. She smiled. That's a hard-earned kind of good. Yeah, I said. It is. The sun dipped low. The cicadas started singing. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I'd made it through. Not by fighting, not by forgetting, but by staying right where I was until the pain lost its sharpness and turned into something else, something like peace. There's no clean line between who I was and who I became. No single day where the pain stopped, no grand moment of redemption. Just a slow shifting, a quiet loosening. Grief, I've learned, doesn't end. It changes shape. It stops screaming and starts humming. Sometimes in the background, sometimes in the walls. But eventually, you live with it like you live with an old injury, aware but unafraid. I still think about her, but not in the way I used to. Not with fire, not with ache. More like you remember a road you traveled once full of hard turns and washed out bridges, but lined with trees that bloomed once too. It happened. It mattered. And it's over. Now the mornings are mine. The quiet is mine. The land beneath my feet doesn't carry her name or mine, and that's the beauty of it. I'm not trying to rebuild what was. I'm just learning to build again. Slower, wiser, with better nails. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.